Okay, so today we're going to begin the forward to the second edition. The big book strikes back. Since the original forward to this book was written in 1939, a wholesale miracle has taken place. Our earliest printing voiced the hope that every alcoholic who journeys will find the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Already, continues the early text, twos and threes and fives of us have sprung up in other communities. Okay, so 16 years have elapsed between the first printing of this book and the presentation in 1955 of our second edition. In that brief space, Alcoholics Anonymous has mushroomed into nearly 6,000 groups whose membership is far above the 150,000 recovered alcoholics. Groups are to be found in each of the United States and all of the provinces of Canada. AA has flourishing communities in the British Isles, the Scandinavian countries, South Africa, South America, Mexico, Alaska, Australia, and Hawaii. All told, promising beginnings have been made in some 50 foreign countries and US possessions. Some are just now taking shape in Asia. Many of our friends encourage us by saying that this is but a beginning, only the augury of a much larger future ahead. Augury means something that indicates future happenings, and we see that word recovered again. The spark that was to flare in the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. So we know the New York stockbroker is Bill and the physician is Bob. 6 months earlier, the broker, Bill, had been relieved of his drink. So you can read a little bit more into our history, but here's the thing is Dr. Bob was already in the Oxford group. He was well versed on the spiritual concepts and just some of our core tenets in this in our program, but he was still struggling. And the women, I believe that the women around them set up this meeting. And so Bob said he was willing to talk to Bill for only 15 minutes. That was it. He wasn't going to give him any more than that. So Bill shows up at Bob's house and they sit down, and Bill does not come at him with the spiritual solution. He doesn't start with that. As we will learn on page 42, we will see that we do not start coming in hot with spiritual ideas. Remember, we're dealing with a person with a spiritual malady who's got prejudice around the word God. So we cannot gain their confidence and trust by coming in hot with God. If that were the case, then religion might work for people, right? But it's not working. So what does Bill do in this 15 minutes? He focuses on the physical aspect, the allergy of the body. He comes at him with how we are physically and mentally different from our fellows, right? So that's in two ways. We have Dr. Silkworth's theory on the phenomena craving. He starts with that. He talks about the mental differences between an alcoholic and a normie, which is we suffer from an obsession of the mind. Suffering, the definition of suffering means without choice, right? And the obsession is a persistent, recurring thought that does not respond to reason. Check your own experience. How many fabulous reasons have you had for not drinking? I'm sure in our fellowship, we can come up with the best reasons for not drinking. Threat of losing a family, getting divorced, losing a job, going to prison, dying. We have the best reasons. No one can beat us on that, but it is not enough, right? Without a spiritual experience, the insane idea will always win out. We have an obsession of the mind, persistent, recurring thought that does not respond to reason. Okay, so Bill wins over Bob in that 15 minutes by focusing on the physical attributes of alcoholism, something which religion will absolutely never bring up, right? So we can take this as a lesson on how we're going to work with other alcoholics. This day and age, it's a little bit different because maybe by the time you work with an alcoholic, they've already been exposed to AA and the 12 steps and they know about the spiritual aspect. But still, you don't have to come in hot with that. Remember, we have to go through the investigation and we can focus on the obsession of the mind and the allergy of the body. Okay, so 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drink obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford groups of that day. He had also been greatly helped by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members, and whose story of the early days of our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism, though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford group. A tenet is a principle or belief. Bill was not a big fan of religion, but he did believe in spiritual concepts necessary for recovery. Though he could not accept all the principles or beliefs of the Oxford group, he was convinced, there's that word convinced again, of the need for a moral inventory, which is step 4, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity and belief in and dependence upon God. So that is some early beginnings. I'm going to ask you to go with me a little bit here to we didn't have 12 steps when we started, we had 6. So depending on what edition you're in here, are you in the 3rd edition or the 4th edition? Please go to 292 or 263. And at the top of the page, we have the first 6 steps. The 6-step program as it was at the time, the 6 steps were: number 1, complete deflation. My question to you to contemplate: complete deflation of what? Ego. Number 2, dependence and guidance from a higher power. Number 3, moral inventory. Number 4, confession. Number 5, restitution. And number 6, continued work with other alcoholics. Hold on a second. What does continued mean? It means that it's already been happening. So as you can see with our 12 steps now, it doesn't mention working with other alcoholics until step 12. But in our first 6 steps, it's giving us the idea that it's been happening all along. I'm going to provide more evidence from our textbook on how we work with others from the gate. This continued work with other alcoholics just shows me that you do not wait till the last step to start working with others. Okay, so here we have the friend that, I guess I'm going back a little bit here, but it talks about a meeting with an alcoholic friend. That friend was Ebby T. So Ebby was firing his gun at a pigeon and had a legal problem again. Well, members from the Oxford group went before the court and asked them to treat his drinking problem. That was Roland Hazard and Zebra. And I'm looking for a space in our literature to confirm that. Ebby had 60 days when he went to see Bill, and look what happened. We start working with others as soon as possible. Okay. I'm really emphasizing that we start working with others and helping others early on. We don't wait till some magical time at the 12th step for this to happen. In my experience, many alcoholics can't get through the 4th or 5th step without this relief we get from working with others along the way. You know, we take away drugs and alcohol. We still have this alcoholic mind. We're on the, you know, we're becoming recovered, but we need some way to get ease and comfort as we are going through this process of facing and removing, of getting things out. And we get that by working with other alcoholics. What if someone had told Abby Thatcher that he can't work with others at 60 days sober? He would have not have made the approach to Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson wouldn't have got sober, wouldn't have written the textbook, and where would we be today? So I full on reject when people say in the that tell people not to help others early on. I reject that completely. Okay, we got through. We hit all those points there. So prior to his journey in Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help another alcoholic, but he had succeeded in only keeping himself sober. I don't mean to laugh because I'm so grateful for Bill's work, but when you hear some of the stories, like Bill had a white light experience, and you know, he didn't have trailblazers behind him. He was the trailblazer. We have all this experience now that we can learn from the first 100 men and women. But one of Bill's approaches is he would walk into a bar with people on bar stools who were actively drinking and try to work with them. And it didn't, obviously, that wasn't the best approach, but you know, he was trying everything. But what happened is Bill Wilson didn't take a drink, right? He was actively abandoning himself to the idea of carrying the message, and he did not take a drink. So the broker had gone to Akron on a business venture which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again. And he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to other alcoholics. What does the word must mean? Does it mean take what you want and leave the rest? Or does it mean a requirement? I'm going to ask you again to read the top or the first sentence on page 89. Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. It works when other activities fail. What are the other activities? Could that be go to a meeting and call your sponsor? Could it mean, you know, when you're at the meeting, share what you're pissed off about? What's your experience? Is that getting us the 75% recovery rate? No, it's not. So we work strenuously to carry the message. And I am going to ask you to go to page 159 and the second paragraph. This time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident remained in that town. So this is when Bill Wilson went on his business venture that collapsed. He was there 3 months. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance, the lawyer, and the devil-may-care chap. These men had found something brand new in life, though they know they must help other alcoholics if they were to remain sober. Uh-oh. It says it again. Uh-oh. That motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves to others. So here's a question that comes up a lot. We know from page 62 that selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our trouble. And at the same time, we're like, oh my God, I have to work with other alcoholics if I'm to stay sober. That feels selfish, right? But what we find once we fully engage in this work and get some traction going, that self-seeking part of it drops. and we literally feel the joy of helping others. So it's a temporary thing. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never before been able to muster. So Bill Wilson successfully convinced him of what it meant to be an alcoholic, essentially, is what happened. He sobered, never to drink again, up until the moment of his death in 1950. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work one alcoholic with another was vital to permanent recovery. Huh? Uh-oh. Okay. So vital means essential for life. If you look vital up in the dictionary, essential for life. So what's essential for my life? Oxygen, water, sleep, essential amino acids, and work with another alcoholic. This is what is vital for me to stay alive as an alcoholic. So in Appendix 2, which is the first session in the Big Book study, we learned that we must have willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness. And willingness is defined for our purposes, is demonstrated only by action. We got these computers between our ears that can think faster than anything. And it often thinks and projects, and we can think, but what do our actions demonstrate, right? When I and I don't know about you, but I have this kind of alcoholic mind that's constant, or that will say, you're not doing a good enough job, you're not doing it right, blah, 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 blah. It's the ego mind tearing me down. So when I first started doing this, would write down literally the actions I took that week and set aside whatever thoughts I had. So I would say, well, I went looking for people to work with 3 times this week. I wrote out my columns and just literally write down on a piece of paper what I actually did, not what I thought. And that helped me get through that. Okay, so 3 points are made clear by this. It is necessary to be convinced of this physical factor. It is necessary to be convinced. When I went to a first AA meeting, my first AA meeting, which was decades ago, the first thing I was asked to do was admit I was an alcoholic. They handed me that 20-question test. Are you an alcoholic? As a piece of paper, and you write it down. And I got an A+, of course. But that was literally my first thing, was to, a 20-point test isn't going to convince me of A, B, and C. It isn't going to bring to my innermost self that I'm alcoholic. And what does it mean to be an alcoholic? If you ask 100 people in the program, in the fellowship today, what does it mean to be an alcoholic? You're not going to get the same answer. You might even get answers that indicate there's some type of control, right? An alcoholic suffers from an obsession of the mind, from a strange mental blank spot. An alcoholic has an allergy of the body, that once alcohol gets inside my body, I lose all control whatsoever. So I have a mind that's going to convince me to pick up a drink, or it may not check in with me at all with the strange mental blank spot, which we'll get into in Bill's story. Then once that alcohol gets in my body, now the phenomenon of craving is more than, I don't have any control over that. I have no willpower over that. And we're off and running. So the 3 points we learned from Bill and Bob's first interaction is that it's necessary to be convinced of the physical factor, that only an alcoholic can help another alcoholic, and that we work with others early on as soon as possible. We are in the foreword to the second edition, and these 3 important points that are made are so powerful and change the way I work my program. Yet I didn't know them until I came to the Big Book study, and I had already been through a treatment center, a women's recovery home, had a therapist, a psychiatrist, a sponsor. I had a commitment at AA meetings every single day. And I was the secretary of H&I. I postponed going to college so that I could be this good AA member and do all these things that they're saying. And I had no understanding of this. So the Big Book study changed my life. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silk, oh, we already read that. We still have more points to make here. Strenuous work. Strenuous means not easy, vigorous, energetic, forceful, and lively. Okay? Check your own experience. Practice introspection. Look at yourself. Can you say that your work with other alcoholics fits this description? Is it strenuous? I often hear people argue with me or balk when I show these points that we need to work with other alcoholics, saying, well, I have service commitments. I pick up alcoholics, I drive them to a meeting, or I wash the ashtrays. Well, that just dated me. We don't have ashtrays anymore. I'm the greeter, I have the coffee commitment, or I have the cake commitment, whatever. Is that strenuous? Okay, I don't think so. And is it enough to pull you out of the extreme self-centered alcoholic mind? It wasn't enough for me. When I think of strenuous, let's think of an analogy here. So I was on a cycling team for a year, and more than a year, and we were training to do this long distance ride from Los Angeles to San Francisco. It's 545 miles, 7 days. That is strenuous. I can say that was, outside of AA, the most strenuous thing that I ever did. It was hard. So when I want you to find something that's strenuous in your life and use that as an analogy. Because we have to master this, right? That it's vital to permanent recovery. Oh, and by the way, when you think about your quest for getting drugs and alcohol in your life and you're using, did you not do some strenuous, extreme things? My drinking and using was more before I was 21. I started drugs when I was 9. There were a lot of drugs around in my environment, and I was able to get them. Then, that environment changed, and I was on my own, but now I'm addicted and I got to get them. And I did some strenuous things. I did some terrible things in order to get it. I mean, like 3 o'clock in the morning, walking under a bridge and buying something from somebody in a bush that I can't even see as a 15-year-old woman or girl, sneaking across the border into Tijuana so I can buy gallons of tequila for $5, trying to get those back over into America. So I was willing and able to do that for my disease. How willing am I in recovery, in my quest for spiritual progress, to do strenuous things? Right. So hence the 2 men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their very first case, a desperate one, recovered and immediately became AA number 3. So does frantically describe your work with other alcoholics? No, probably not. AA number 3 was Bill Dotson, and his story is in one of the editions of the Big Book, which we'll talk about soon, how the stories have changed. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous by the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended, and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering time. Oh, did I miss something here? Oh, okay, this is just a little bit on the publication of the book. With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fulton Ursler, then editor of Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office. In the spring of 1940, John D. Rockefeller Jr. gave a dinner for many of his friends to which he invited AA members to tell their stories. News of this got on the world wires. Inquiries poured in, and again, many people went to the bookstores to get the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And by March 1941, the membership had shot up to 2,000. Let's pause there for a second. Do you remember from the very first thing in the Big Book study, we talk about a statement that Bill Wilson made in 1941 in the Grapevine, which is, our first obligation to the newcomer is an adequate presentation of the program. We know now why that happened in 1941, because all of a sudden this program grew, right? So what happens? You have a small group of 100 men and women who are working with each other, right? They customary to attend one meeting a week, but outside of that, they're working one-on-one with each other with the original message. And then all of a sudden, we have 2,000 people. What do you think happens, right? Something like the telephone game. One person says something, and by the time it gets around a circle, it's distorted. So right there, in my opinion, is when the message started getting watered down. It was also around this time that hospitals were filling up busloads of people and dropping them off at AA meetings, and the format of AA meetings changed. Start sitting in a circle, starts being more like a group therapy session where we're talking about ourselves. So it just kind of grew so fast that the original tone and format of those first 100 men and women started to get watered down. And I want to remind you that first 100 men and women, in that we had a 75% recovery rate. And in 2024, we have a 10% recovery rate. For me, this is important, extremely important, because I don't want to die. I only not want to die. I don't want to suffer from the symptoms of alcoholism that can still exist in a dry state. And so if you want what we have, page 58, if you want what the first 100 men and women had, then you do what the first 100 men and women did. By the close of 1941, AA numbered 8,000 members. This mushrooming process was in full swing, and AA became a national institution. Okay, so here are some cross references here if you want to read more about this. PIO means pass it on, so page 258 and pass it on. You could read more about Jack Alexander. And then in the third edition on page 469 on the 6th paragraph, you could read more about how AA became an institution. There is an article in the Liberty magazine that's a handout we can provide for you. The Saturday Evening Post is a handout we can provide for you. Here's also a link if you want to read more about these particular moments in history. So our society then entered a fearsome and exciting adolescent period. The test that it faced was this: could these large numbers of erstwhile erratic alcoholics successfully meet and work together? Would there be quarrels over membership, leadership, and money? Would there be strivings for power and prestige? Would there be schisms, which is a split or division into opposing groups? which would split AA apart. Soon AA was beset by these very problems on every side and in every group. But out of this frightening and at first disrupting experience, the conviction grew that AAs had to hang together or die separately. We had to unify our fellowship or pass off the scene. As we discovered the principles by which the individual alcoholic could live, so we had to evolve principles by which the AA groups and AA as a whole could survive and function effectively. It was thought that no alcoholic man or woman could be excluded from our society, that our leaders might serve but not govern, that each group was to be autonomous and there was to be no professional class of therapy. There were to be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. There was to be the least possible organization, even our service centers. Our public relations were to be based on attraction rather than promotion. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films. I wonder if they would have put social media. And in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. So this paragraph became the basis of the 12 traditions. I'm sure you understand its importance. And this is found published in 1946, and you can find more on page 561. Here are some early sobriety numbers. So 75% of the people stayed sober back then. What is the number today? Well, we just looked it up, it's 10%. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends, which is ministration means aid, serving, or aiding. Friends in medicine, men of religion, which they mean the Oxford group, and the press together were innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have only made the slowest progress. Some of the recommendations of AA's early medical and religious friends can be found further in this book. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine and religion. So let's look on page 95, the fourth paragraph. One, two, three, four. If he thinks he can do the job in some other way or prefers some other spiritual approach, encourage him to follow his conscience. We have no monopoly on God. We merely have an approach that worked with us. But point out that we alcoholics have much in common and that you would like in any case to be friendly. Let it go at that. So that's our stance on religion there. Okay. This makes it clear to me that there are aspects of alcoholism addressed in AA that are not addressed in a religious group. We learned that with Bill's approach with Bob, right? Page 28. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such membership. I also like to notice here how different the message of AA is versus religious messages. No one is stating our version of God is the only true one. This is spiritual, not religious. So in spite of the great increase in the size and the span of this fellowship, at its core remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. So the last word there is hope, which is defined on page 66, kind of in the middle of the page. I'm going to read it for you right now. But with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. My hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. It seems to me that there's nothing more than I need to study and understand more deeply than what is a spiritual experience and how do I get it, which is answered in our literature. So that's the forward. It's already pretty clear what I need to recover, and we haven't even got to page 1 yet. So I am going to introduce you to a bit of homework before we get to page 1. This is a homework assignment. We have homework on page 47. There are instructions on page 47, and that might shock you because you probably never heard it, don't hear it in meetings. Nobody really talks about this. But I'm going to give you the homework assignment now. So when we get to page 47, you are ready to go. Top of page 47. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God, right? Spiritual, not religious. This applies too to other spiritual expressions you may find in this book. Do not let any prejudice. Prejudice is defined as a preconceived idea or belief without due examination or knowledge. A preconceived idea without due examination or knowledge. We are facing our prejudice around a higher power, a God, whatever word you want to use. I really don't care. We have to face our prejudice. So do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from practicing honesty, from you honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. Remember, honesty is a requirement from Appendix 2. Willingness, honesty, open-mindedness. Willingness is demonstrated only by action. Honesty is getting honest with yourself, an awareness of where you are at. Open-mindedness, an open mind to all spiritual concepts. Right now, we're going to have a tangible thing that we can do to engage in those requirements. This is an instruction. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. Now, here's the promise. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. After this exercise, we found ourselves accepting many things, which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. So there is a handout on spiritual terms. I have, which I will post in the comments, but there's a real handout of spiritual terms, and your homework assignment is to look these up, write them down, and define them. So I originally asked people to use a dictionary from 1935 because there's just a few, we want to use what was happening at the time of the publication of the book. Some people have obstacles on that. So just use whatever dictionary you have. And in this day and age, we have the internet. So there you go. I'll post the link to it, and I will see you for the next session. Oh, okay. The parking lot is open. Do we have any questions?
Yes, I have, let's see, just a couple clarification questions. I think I know the answer, but is it accurate to say that the investigation period is the first 60 pages?
Yes, from the beginning of the book up until that part on page 60 where it says, if you are convinced, you are now at step 3.
Okay, got it. And then the next question, what I heard you say is that the ease and comfort that we once got from alcohol, that ease and comfort we will and can get by working strenuously with others.
Exactly.
Now that's how we receive that comfort that we once had from drinking.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. And then let's see. So the question that I have now regarding strenuous work for alcoholics. So I've been doing the meeting format that you suggested, and that as of the last week, or not even an entire week yet, has been my work with other alcoholics. for the time being, that's all I'm doing. So I'm thinking that just continuing to build on that, but is that a start? Is that an adequate start? Or
Yes.
should I be even maybe offering it if I feel that it's appropriate to offer help? Or not help, but my experience, I suppose.
I'm going to give you the same thing that was given to me when I was in that space. When the ideal standard that we're looking for here is a minute, 3 hours a week with another alcoholic, one-on-one, taking him through the big book study. So that could be, um, I'm sorry, I'm thinking too many thoughts and I can't speak them fast enough.
That's okay. Take your time. I know it's kind of a big question in a sense. I have enjoyed doing that. And it feels different than what I was doing prior to these last several days. I feel different spiritually. I have more ease and comfort than I did even, 6 days ago. So my plan is just to continue to add to that and build on that.
Can you expand a little bit more on what you're referring to, the 5 questions to the meeting handout?
Yeah, so you gave me a format to sort of look at or follow while attending meetings in that particular way on a PDF three times a week, which would be the 3 hours a week. I have for the last 6 days or so been using that format while in meetings and while sharing in meetings, which has little to do with me and my problems and my self-pity and all of my shit, and more has to do with how am I contributing to this meeting? What am I giving to the meeting? So my question is that sufficient for now, I suppose?
Of course it is. Yes. I mean, I would ideally like to add that at the end of the meeting, I don't know how they work in your particular city, but in our city, you can make non-AA announcements. And so I would not only answer the 5 questions, but I would get up at the non-AA announcements and I would say, I can see that it says in the doctor's opinion that part of my real rehabilitation is intensive work with other alcoholics. I am convinced that I must work with other alcoholics if I'm to recover from alcoholism. Is there anyone here who's willing to let me take them through the big book for 1 hour as I am being taken through the big book? And
Okay.
leave it at that. And after the meeting, I would always get someone, but I might get 4 or 5 people that say, that is so, I've never heard someone make an announcement like that before. Can you tell me more about what you're doing?
Mhm.
And exchange phone numbers. And I just kind of did that until I had my 3 people a week.
Mhm. Okay.
But people are usually this early on in the big book study unwilling to do that because they're riddled by fear.
Yeah, I
And
feel that. I feel fear that I'm inept, inadequate to
yeah,
begin doing that. But I also know that I've been thoroughly paying attention, reading, taking notes, and studying. So I have a deeper understanding, and certainly I can begin there, with the deeper understanding that I have at even now.
yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit more because that's a common thing that I hear is like, the alcoholic mind, the ego mind, remember, isn't going to aid in its own destruction. So it's going to stop you from trying to do this stuff and put you down with things like, I'm not good enough.
Right.
You can't transmit something you haven't got. Yada, yada, yada. We can increase the list ad infinitum. Well, um, think of it like this. Let's say we were both taking a chemistry class and I missed a class and I said to you, oh my gosh, can you give me the notes from that last class?
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
don't want to get a diminished grade on my quiz. And if we were in a chemistry class and I asked you for the notes, how would you feel about that?
I would feel like, absolutely, you can see my notes. Absolutely.
Right? This is no different than that.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Okay. Okay, awesome. And then I think this is the last question, but you said the recovery rate now is 10% in 2024, which I completely see, believe with my own eyes and my own ears. You had said that in some year, I forget, but my question is, what year was it 75%? The beginning, right? In the 30s, 50s?
Yeah, that is um that is at the top. Um, so what edition am I looking? I'm at the 4th edition on page XX. It says of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober, and once they remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses. And among the remainder, those who stayed showed improvement. So that's where we get the 75% from.
Mhm.
Forward to the 2nd edition, which at some point gave us 1955.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I related that to what you had said next was page 58, if you want what we have on page 58, what the difference was then versus what it is now, even percentage wise, might and probably has a lot to do, maybe everything to do with if you want what we have on page 58. Is that accurate to say? And
Exactly.
it was associated with the success rate being so vastly different?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's definitely a page to continue to look at then, for me at least, if I want, because I do want what they have. Yeah, those are really the questions. That's it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I will end this recording.
Okay.